afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Fashion's Age of Invention, Part 2, Toward a Balance with Nature. I'm Shelley Rogers, Coordinator of Fashion for the Earth at earthday.org, and we are very pleased to present today's webinar in partnership and collaboration with Kerry Bannigan. Kerry is the Director of the Fashion Impact Fund and the co-founder of the Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network. Today, we're proud to be presenting 4 truly remarkable people and their remarkable inventions. But first, a few words to set a framework for this webinar with some basic background information and speaking generally, skipping over some exceptions to the rules. Today, the fashion industry produces 150 billion garments every year, and 85% of these are sent to a landfill or an incinerator, and increasingly in short order. That leaves 15% that is not wasted. Out of that 15%, only 1% will actually be recycled. And by recycled, that means in the true sense of the word, which would be what's called textile to textile, used clothing made into new clothing. So what are the 15% that is not wasted? These are garments that we give to somebody, we swap at a project, we resell online, we contribute to a charitable organization, or return to a brand that will take clothing back. And some brands will take any brand and accept clothes in any condition. Eventually, however, a very large percentage of these clothes are going to end up in salvage, meaning sold to a textile collector. A textile collector is a for-profit company. And sometimes these collectors, you'll actually see their bins in your neighborhood or your city because they can collect on their own. These clothes are transported to their facility where they're aggregated and then sorted by workers who sort all of these garments, believe it or not, by hand. Here, a sorter has to make a decision about each garment and what bin to toss it into. It might go into a bin for resale that gets further broken down depending on where the collector sends them. It could be baled up and sent somewhere in the US, but more probably to a country in the global south where it will end up in a marketplace, which is a separate environmental issue not discussed today. Or it can go into a bin for what is called downcycling. Downcycling is where clothes are going to be chopped up and used for insulation, carpeting, mattress stuffing, or industrial wipes. But the most important bin in this facility would be a bin, if there is one, for sending the garments to a true recycler, where clothes can be broken down into their original fibers and then those fibers used to make new ones. So how is real recycling done? There are 2 methods. One is mechanical and one is chemical. But now, speaking very generally, both types have been mainly successful in dealing with a single fiber, like 100% cotton or near 100% cotton, or with a synthetic material alone. But today, of course, the majority of our clothes are not made from single fiber. They're blended fibers, particularly cotton polyester, which is a blend that seems to predominate. Of course, the used clothing is only one part of the waste that the fashion industry creates. There is enormous waste of material left on cutting room floors, in scraps, in warehouses of unused material, waste from online returns, and unsold clothing. So there are many questions that we should be asking ourselves if we care about the environment. How can our used clothing efficiently and expeditiously get to a true recycler? What about recovering more than one fiber in a garment? What can we, the consumer, do to keep our clothes in circulation when we don't really know very much about them, including how to take care of them, how to repair them, how to resell them, and how to recycle them? And finally, what can be done about reducing all of this waste by not making so many garments in the first place? Today, we're truly honored to have with us 4 people who have answered these questions with their incredible inventions that, once they are scaled, can move the fashion industry away from its current business model of take, make, and waste on a gargantuan scale toward a circular system to achieve what has been lost along the way, a balance with nature. And now, without further ado, thank you so much, Kerry, for being today's moderator, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Shelley. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm Kerry Bannigan. I am joined by four fantastic, very interesting innovators. So I'd like to welcome and thank for taking the time to join us today. Natasha Frank, founder and CEO of Eon. Beth Ezenet, co-founder of Unspun. Pete Marajanowski, co-founder and CEO of Cirque. And Constanza Gomez, co-founder and CEO of Sortile. Thank you to each of you for taking the time for this discussion today. So, Natasha, I'm going to start with you. You started out your career in urban planning and cities with intelligent design through systems thinking to help create a living ecosystem, which could look like a better quality of life, reducing costs and improving environmental performance. Now, cities, as you have said, are systems, and you eventually become interested in waste. And then the fact that products are not connected or a part of that system. And you asked yourself, but what would happen if they were? So tell us this. How did waste lead you to the fashion industry, to the Internet of Things, to a circular economy? And how does Eon come into play with all of these things? I know this is a big loaded question to set us off. There is a lot to be unveiled here, so please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Natasha, founder and CEO of Eon. Thank you for the background and introduction. My interest, and I guess where we saw the biggest opportunity when we started on the work at Eon, which is, today billions and billions of products are produced every single day, and where do those products and materials go? We ID those products and materials in the supply chain, and then those billions of materials are sold and purchased, and basically everything that we buy is just a future state of trash. And so that idea of all of these products and materials kind of just disappearing and becoming waste led me into kind of obsession with how to maximize, manage, and utilize each and every product and steward that through a sustainable and circular life cycle. I was simultaneously studying like Internet of Things technology and digital twins, and saw the applications of the technology as one of the biggest enablers for sustainable and circular business model transformation within fashion. And so you might ask kind of, what is a digital twin? Well, if you think about it, Airbnb is really a digital twin of your home, and that unlocks the monetization and utility of your home. And Uber is a digital twin of cars, and that unlocks the monetization and utility of those vehicles. Soon we will have a digital twin and connectivity within each and every physical product, enabling those products to be ID'd and shared and resold and monetized in entirely new ways, such that those, kind of like a barcode for the circular economy, each and every item can be managed and stewarded through that sustainable life cycle. So those were some of the ideas that inspired me in the genesis of Eon. And I think what was sort of the biggest, unlock, and what led me to, I guess, start the business, was seeing how impactful this was for sustainable business model transformation. And I'd say within the fashion industry today, all these products that brands produce, they only monetize them once at point of sale, right? So it's always going to be more profitable to produce 2 shirts instead of 1 if your business models just sell more product. And with product identity, we are proving that brands can actually monetize these products and materials throughout their entire life cycle. And with that new incentive, we believe that is really unlocking new structural changes within the business model of fashion that are to the benefit of all of us.
Incredible. Thank you so much. And I love that. This will actually help me a lot. Digital twin. I think that is a great way to break that down, especially when there's so much to understand with this. So thank you very much. And Joshua, I see, who is watching, wishes everyone a happy early Earth Day. Thank you very much, Joshua. So moving over to you, Beth. Now, in college and graduate school, you actually studied art and apparel design on one side, but then actually fiber science and mechanical engineering on the other. So with art and science mixed, with your love of fashion thrown in. After college, you went on to work for an outdoor apparel company. Can you tell us how that experience changed your way of thinking and made you feel differently about the fashion industry, and ultimately led you to Unspun?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I've been enamored by fashion since I was very little, and I think the reason is that it's a science and an art that's every day. It really reminds me of David Foster Wallace's "This is Water" speech, where he talks about the fish being in the water and not actually knowing what water is because it's everywhere and they've taken it for granted. And that's how I felt about clothing growing up. And I just love how it has so many facets coming together. But what I didn't realize was actually I was right, but I didn't realize how right I was in thinking that we took it for granted, that even I took it for granted. And once I got out into the industry, realized how far removed I was from the clothing that was being produced, and that, back in the mid 1900s, almost all of the clothing in the United States was made here. And that's true of a lot of the world. It was localized. And now less than 2% of what, it's even smaller now, really, of what we wear in the United States was actually made here. And that's one really big reason why we've just taken it for granted. It's so far removed from our everyday lives. So that was kind of the first thing that I realized getting into the industry, was that although it's a very positive industry, it's all about self-expression and creativity, and it's really a great thing for the world to have. But behind the scenes, there's so much exploitation, waste, pollution, all of these things that are overshadowing the benefits. And I think really the final straw for me was in my second job. I was at a meeting with people I really admired. I was like the entry-level person who shouldn't be in the meeting, kind of fly on the wall. I think they just let me in to learn, and I shouldn't have contributed, really, was the idea. And I remember everyone discussing a whole bunch of excess tents that we needed to get rid of. It was all these tents that we had created and didn't have a home for. And I remember everyone going around the room coming up with Band-Aid solutions. Do we incinerate it, burn it, send it off? What should we do with these? And I think because I was so fresh, I thought, why is this a problem? Why did you even make this stuff? And so that was really the impetus for me to start thinking about why do we do it this way? How can we make on demand back to how it was before, but can we use technology now to make that possible?
Thank you so much. And I love actually your perspective where you say you shouldn't have been able to contribute. But I sometimes think we're so far in the weeds in the fashion industry that we do need that bird's eye view and perspective. So I'm glad you were in that room. So Constanza, your company sought out as a new innovation that deals with textile waste in the fashion industry. You have said that your interest in the subject comes from a personal level and you feel very passionate about finding a solution to the problem. Can you tell us why you had such a personal interest in this problem?
Sure. So while I do live in the US now, I'm originally from Chile. I actually moved to the US about 5 years ago. And Chile is actually one of the largest importers of secondhand clothes in the world, mostly from Europe and the US. And about 40,000 tons of these materials actually end up in an illegal dumping ground in the north of the country. And so my country has literally seen this problem firsthand because it actually lands in our backyard. And my first professional job was actually studying retail in Latin America. And there was, while I was there was a random law change in terms of how companies had to book obsolete inventory in their balance sheets. And kind of like what Beth was saying, just now, the solution that a lot of these companies came up with in terms of how to be able to get these inventory off of their financial statements was to actually just send it to landfills, clothing that in most cases had never even seen the light of day, had never been worn, was in pristine conditions. And everything's accumulating in the north of the country and nobody's making any effort to actually handle it in any way. And so that slowly, I was a researcher at heart, and slowly led into somewhat of an obsession of trying to understand why this was the default solution. And any time that you would even suggest something different, whether it was, selling it secondhand, in this case, it was new clothing. Oh no, that's, brand reputation. We can't do that. Okay, could you recover some materials? No, that's too difficult. It's too hard. And so it was just roadblock after roadblock. And yet companies kept on producing and producing, and ending up in these illegal dumping grounds. And so it's something that's, touched me very personally from, where I'm from, what my experience professionally has been. And it has slowly, like I said, led into this fascination with trying to find these solutions and not being stopped by this is too hard or this hasn't been done before.
Thank you so much for sharing that and your story, your journey, and your determination. Thank you. So, Pete, over to you. Textile Exchange describes the increase of textile to textile recycling as the holy grail of circular fashion. Now, your technology is pretty groundbreaking here because it has solved one of the most vexing of all problems in fashion: how to recycle a polyester cotton blended garment, and not only being able to break those two fibers into separate parts, but retaining each one's strength and viability. So there's kind of three parts to this question here. How do you do this? Why is it different than mechanical recycling? And how does this innovation change things in a major way?
Yeah, I'm a little bit biased, but I don't disagree that it is the Holy Grail. And factually speaking, it's very important. And I think Shelley laid it out very well in the outset here. But over 60% of the textiles we produce today are blends, mostly poly cotton blends. And traditional mechanical recycling can't handle it. If it would be able to handle it, we'd have more than 1% of textile to textile recycling. And the reason for that is traditional mechanical recycling tears and opens up the fiber, tries to get those fibers back and respin it, usually with another stronger fiber type like polyester or some virgin cotton. And it has to be sorted by color. You need usually a monofiber type. So pure cotton is usually the way it's done. It's usually done with post-industrial waste, so not post-consumer or the unsold inventory that a lot of us have been talking about today. So that's where you need a solution like ours. And we're classified as a molecular recycling solution, meaning that we're working on the molecular level of these important molecules. And so the secret to our solution is that we're able to reverse the reaction that makes polyester in the first place. And when we do that, it's broken down to its monomer building blocks. And so now we can unstick it from the cotton. We've separated it from the cotton. And then we're able to purify those building blocks and repolymerize it back into new polyester fiber. And it has all the characteristics of virgin PET or virgin polyester fiber, which is really good and really important for the industry to be reused and reused and reused. The remaining cotton, we also clean up and purify and regenerate that into textile fibers as well. So we're able to take any color, any ratio, pure polyester, pure cotton, polycotton from 80-20, 20-80, everything in between, and break down both sides, purify them, and make them back into new textiles. And so to your last point of why is this so important? What are the ramifications? Well, you've really lowered the bar on feedstock costs and sorting and challenges when you don't have to sort by color, you don't have to be, pure cotton or pure polyester. And that's really, really important because you need the unit economics to drive this so we can increase that recycling rate from less than 1% to way closer to 100%.
Thank you so much. I feel like we need a session just on a lesson on all of this. This was amazing. Thank you so much. Now, Natasha, I'm just going to come back to you. I know you started to share a little bit earlier about things, but this is a question, especially for our audience who might not be as tech savvy. Now, Aeon creates a unique digital ID for every apparel product. But what is that? And can you take it further into how does it work? What's that process like?
Yeah. The simplest way to sort of get your head around this in the beginning is it's like a barcode for the circular economy. And basically, if you think about it, the circular economy, or this idea of circular economy as we talk about it, right, is really the largest global logistics challenge in the world. It means keeping every product at highest and best use at all times. It means understanding where that product is. It means moving that product and material to the right place. And today, we run that without any intelligence or information or ability to ID a product and material. So to me, when you sort of because when my background was in cities, you're looking at things at a macro level, right? You're trying to figure out how to move all of these products from all these different brands through a system. Now, when you're just an individual brand, you're like, oh, I'm going to make my t-shirt out of recyclable materials, and that means we're going to have a circular economy. Like, no, right? Where does that product go? How do we manage that? How does that move through resale? How does that customer get that product back in the system? So you could kind of think of what the digital ID does. So I'll break it down a little bit more. What it is there will be something within each physical product that gives it a unique ID. That could be a QR code or a barcode or an NFC chip or some form of tag in the item, right? Now, there will also be like a data profile in the cloud that holds all the information about that item. So it will say this product, this material content, this is the factory it came from. This is the MSRP when it comes to resale. So the product will actually in the cloud hold all the information. And that data will be accessible to anyone who's interacting with the product. So if you're the customer, you'll be able to scan your products and understand exactly where they came from. You'll be able to access a world of services directly through that product. And if you're a reseller, you'll also be able to interact with the product's ID. But instead of accessing the customer experience, you'll access all the information that you need to resell it, the MSRP, the size, the color, right? Today, resale doesn't operate profitably in part because there's no way to ID and manage all the billions of products. Then if you're the recycler, you need information about, what's the material content of that product. And you'll be able to access that information. So you could think of the digital ID as like the connective tissue. It gives every physical product a voice, and it enables that product to be managed and stewarded through the entire life cycle. I think one of the really exciting things that it solves for from a customer perspective, like what does it mean for you as a user, is it's going to make resale as easy as shopping, right? If you today for customers, you have one-click buy from Amazon, right? Or from any website really today. And when you want to go to resell something, you're manually typing all the information, what size, what color, what season. Now with the digital ID, you just scan your product, it's instantly identified, and you upload it into your e-commerce partner of choice. So we just did that in an industry first with the brand Chloe and Vestiaire Collective. You can take your Chloe product, you scan the digital ID, Eon has all the data. We permission that to the resale partner Vestiaire, and the customer receives a return label in their email, and they seamlessly resell that item. So by creating all of those, that's just one example of the digital ID enabling the communication. But that gets really exciting because what's happening now in the EU from a legislative perspective is the EU is actually going to be requiring every product to have a digital ID. They call that digital product passport. And that will enable every single item to have an exact provenance. That will enable every single item to tell you all the information, to bringing accountability. And also it will bring all the data about products and materials throughout their life cycle. So you'll be able to see in real time, this amount of product was produced, this amount of product was recycled or not recycled, and here's what the brand owes in tax because of that. Right? So all the post-sale data is going to enable entirely new structures of accountability, in addition to new customer services. So that's what we do.
This is extremely powerful, and I love how you say that this will actually be able to enable reselling to be just as simple as shopping, because somebody that shops pre-loved, it's difficult. And when they say, do you want to list your stuff, and you go to the form, you're like, oh my gosh, and I don't know everything to actually fill it in truthfully.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure on that. And so it's very, very powerful. And Linda in the audience has commented that she loves the idea of checking where clothes come from, because it actually makes sourcing responsible possible. And that's what we're trying to do here, Linda, and this is great. So thank you for sharing that as well, Natasha, because it was actually extremely understandable and relatable. So Constanza, moving over to you now, just still keeping really on this form of train of thought of technology, is how Sortal has developed a handheld device that can identify fiber composition and also collects data that provides management and logistics services. So what is it that the technology that enables this, and how does it actually work in practice?
Yeah, so unfortunately, most clothing today, nobody really knows exactly, or the average consumer doesn't know what they're made of. And it ends up at these textile collection companies and is hand sorted manually. And if we're talking about textile to textile recycling, as Peter was saying earlier, textile to textile recycling today, for the most part, works fiber specific. So you need to separate out the cotton, you need to separate the polyester, the polycotton in case of Cirque's case, and in many cases separate that not only the materials, but the color, fabric construction, and a series of other specifications. That is virtually impossible to do when you're doing it manually. And so the few companies that do it today do it by reading clothing tags. And there's two large issues with that. The first one, about 30 to 40% of clothing doesn't even have clothing tags at the moment that these companies receive them. People cut them, they fade, etc. And the other part is that in many cases, there's errors in those tags. And a lot of these technologies are very, very stringent on their specifications. And so if you send the wrong type of material on a consistent basis, they will actually stop purchasing from a given collector. And so what we provide is a small device that actually allows for somebody to identify the textile composition without having to read clothing tags. We use near spectroscopy as our main sensors, aided by a couple of additional sensors. And those sensors take basically measurements of how much light is reflected by these different materials. We later use machine learning algorithms to make the prediction on whether something is cotton or polyester, etc. In terms of usage for the average person, it's really, really simple. You just place an item, the machine automatically detects there's something on top of it, and everything's color coded. So it'll tell you this is cotton and it'll show you a green screen, or this is polyester, it'll show you a red screen. And so it makes the sorting significantly more efficient. From our initial time studies, we've been able to increase productivity over 5 times in terms of sorting for textile recyclers, while at the same time improving accuracy. And so this allows us not only to reduce the cost of the entire basically logistics and supply chains to textile recyclers, which is crucial if we want this technology to scale, but it also allows us to provide better quality feedstock to these companies. And that's relevant because particularly for mechanical recyclers, the quality of the fiber or the yarn that they're able to produce depends very, very linearly to what feedstock you're providing them. So if you're providing them feedstock that has contaminants or that the colors are not properly sorted, then the resulting yarn will be a lower quality yarn and will probably not be used for clothing in most cases, but rather like less desirable fabrics. And so this is a way for us to truly be able to make or enable fiber to fiber and textile to textile recycling to actually start scaling in terms of both of quality and reducing costs. In terms of data, we actually collect data on absolutely everything that goes through our device. And so that allows us to do 2 things. One, it allows us to actually start providing data to this industry that historically hasn't had it. And so one of the main barriers that we faced when we initially started this was that nobody had any idea of the composition of the materials that was going through their plants. And so we were like, hey, like this could be an actual opportunity for you. You could sell your cotton to a fiber recycler, actually make, revenue out of this. And the response we usually get was like, oh, but I don't even process any cotton, which is virtually impossible in today's world. And so we're actually able to provide all this data and be able to allow these companies to plan out who they sell to and with what frequency. And on the other end, and something that we're looking to implement soon, is it also allows you to have visibility on where these materials are being held. And so it allows for recyclers in the future to actually source them more efficiently. So if you have a recycler that's based in the East Coast, you don't want them to be sourcing their feedstock from the West Coast, right? You want them to have as local of a supply chain as you possibly can. And by having this data, we're able to provide that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that insight. 2 big things I'm very grateful to you here is talking about the data and actually being able to improve industry accuracy, because I know that's something that we're all trying to push for and achieve. So thank you for that. Now, Beth, Unspun is a unique denim brand that uses 3D infrared scanning technology and AI to create made-to-order jeans that fit perfectly. How does this technology work? And could you tell us a little bit more about Vega, your latest innovation?
Of course, yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, so we have a few different technologies we've developed. One you talked about first was the 3D scanning to perfect fit jeans. And we've taken what's a bigger problem and broken it down into pieces that we can address over time. So the first custom fit jeans is really taking software technology to make it possible to automate the process of tailoring so that anyone can get perfect fit and make it a little bit more accessible to anyone. So you do a body scan, which uses infrared scanning, and that goes through an algorithm that represents a particular style of jeans that you might choose. And then that gives us a flat 2D pattern that we then send to our production partners who cut and sew it into a final product. So that is a big step in the right direction for creating on demand and being able to be very intentional about production and only producing what is needed in the world. But we're not quite there yet because those jeans are $200 and they take three weeks to turn around. I think they're worth it, but it is not a very accessible price point for everyone. And the reason for that is that they're made with cut and sew, which is the traditional manufacturing method that's used today. And it's a very manual process. It requires so much human labor. It's a reason that we don't have manufacturing localized anymore, and we have to send it across the world. It also, with this manufacturing method, requires economies of scale to hit the price points that we need. And with those economies of scale, we then need to have really long lead times to put in orders in order to get the products when we need them. So it's a perfect recipe for a guessing game that often doesn't end up right, and it leads to a lot of excess that we don't need. So since we're still using cut and sew, again, takes 3 weeks, it's $200 price point. That's why we're introducing Vega, our 3D weaving machine, to make products on demand in an automated way, so that we don't have to send this across the world to exploit people to make this for us. Instead, we can do this at scale with automation with a machine that's one-off. So an MOQ of one, a minimum order quantity of one, is not a big deal for this machine. It's just computer code telling it what to produce. And it makes a pair of pants in 10 minutes. So it's much faster than what you would do manually. And then kind of the third part of what we're working on is, because we're able to re-establish kind of how things are made, we have the opportunity to design for disassembly. Right now, with the cut and sew method of production, you go from yarn to fabric, you cut up the fabric into smaller pieces and sew those together. The recycling methods that are out there today, and a few that we've talked about on the call, are great. We want to introduce a new one that thinks about yarn as a fundamental piece. And so we recover yarn at the end of our process because we skip that fabric stage. We don't have to cut our product. So we go straight from yarn to final product. And if we can do that, why not go from final product back to yarn at the end of life? So those are the main 3 things we're working on.
Thank you so much. Now, Pete, as we heard earlier at the beginning of this conversation, almost all clothing is landfilled or incinerated because people throw away their unwanted clothing into their trash cans or through the local municipalities, who do not have the ability to separate out used clothing. So if clothes are given to charitable organizations or collection agencies and not resold, they seem to tend to just go to mechanical recycling for stuffing or rags, or even sent abroad. So how, as CERT continues to scale, can you find adequate sources of feedstock from used clothing, particularly when the feedstock has to meet certain specifications?
Yeah, you put your thumb right on a really important issue. And, this, unfortunately or fortunately, there's just so much waste out there. We don't find a challenge yet. But you're addressing really the hardest class of waste, which is the post-consumer waste after it's been in a household or someone's hands and it can't be resold anymore. And with circularity, I think there are a lot of chicken and egg situations. To invest in all this collection, infrastructure, aggregation, sorting, you need to have an outlet to monetize those streams once you actually do all the hard work of sorting them. And And that's not out there yet. You need Circ's solution and others to scale so that you can really justify the upfront cost of doing all that sorting for post-consumer waste. But the good news is that a lot of the chemical or molecular recyclers like Circ are scaling. We've all been able to get investment, which is very critical for us to scale. And we've already seen one with Renewcell in Sweden complete its first plant that went operational this summer. And so that's fantastic. And that helps get solutions like Sortile traction and others traction to get more investment to scale up so that we're kind of in lockstep in terms of getting that post-consumer waste to a solution like Circ. But in the meantime, while those systems are being scaled and put together, there's a tremendous amount of waste from post-industrial waste that Beth was talking about from traditional cut and sew, for example. To make this shirt, there's another shirt worth of waste by weight along that whole supply chain. Starting with spinning, there's waste, weaving, and certainly cutting and sewing. And so that's an accessible amount of waste that really moves the needle in terms of environmental impact that we're able to get right now. There's also, as was alluded to earlier on this panel, a lot of unsold inventory, damaged inventory, returned inventory that's also an excellent amount of waste for us. So we also are looking into those channels for waste as we scale, for feedstock as we scale. And then the third area are heavy textile users that know exactly the type of textiles they're using. So think of hospitality, whether it's hotels or restaurant linens and things like that, or uniform companies. Typically, those are all the same ratio, same color, it's a single source. And so those are ample, among all those categories, ample amount of sourcing for chemical recyclers like Circ.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, Natasha, Eon's cloud platform enables free-flowing data communication across the fashion industry. And that data exchange has the potential to affect change across multiple levels of the industry, which I find extremely exciting. So can you please explain how Eon can continue to create value for brands, consumers, and the environment?
Yeah, I think what's kind of interesting, like people can be sort of like freaked out by like data and connected products and all of this kind of technology. One way that was sort of inspiring for me to think about it is if you've prescribed to like schools of thought like biomimicry or everything, any good system involves communication, right? Like even the human body as a system, like my finger touches something burning hot, it's sending messages to my brain to move my hand, right? That's communication. That's almost like the Internet of Things of your body, right? Now we talk about having a new fashion system, yet we have no communication between people, products, and things. Like there's no connective tissue that drives those new processes or intelligent systems. And every good system is adaptive and responsive. And if you don't have communication between them, they can't be adaptive and responsive. And so that's why this idea of the connected product, this product that exchanges data, shares data, generates data, enables that new sort of kinetic system where we can say, hey, that product hasn't been utilized, or hey, that item's now been resold. And all of that intelligence is going to enable us to keep those products at highest and best use, to utilize them and monetize them in new ways so we can change the business incentives, and then also bring that sort of visibility and accountability to ensure that those stay the same over time. Like those systems stay the same over time. I think we've tended to look at circularity as kind of like, oh, we made this one product and it's perfect and it's circular, but that product's going to enter like 9 different states. So this connective tissue that the digital ID enables is what a technology platform like Eon does. So we're what you call a product cloud platform. So it's not actually any customer data that's coming in here. This is product data. So it's the data about this unique item and the movement of that item across its life cycle. Yes, in some ways it's sort of like Google Analytics for physical products, right? We now know where things are moving in the world. We now can steward them, but it's quite impactful from a systems perspective. I think that hopefully answered the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very insightful. So thank you so much. And I just find it also interesting because I feel like people like yourself have been working on digital for a very long time, but it's now become an extremely hot topic at the forefront of the fashion industry as a major driver and solution. So thank you so much. Now, Beth, from the outset of your career, waste in fashion has been a focus and a matter of deep concern. Unspun's technology appears to be a crowning achievement in that respect because it can take waste down to a bare minimum or absolutely none at all. Now, can you share with us why, and we're not asking you to answer it for the whole industry, but just to give your perspective on why fashion is producing so much waste and how Unspun's technology might provide the solution when it comes to this, because this is one of the biggest problems in the clothing industry.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yesterday I was on listening to a panel on an LCA comparison, and it was really interesting to see the tools that are emerging. I mean, slowly but surely. And through this, I think it was an entire hour, and it was all about the unit basis. And there was no talk. I think they hit on every possible problem in the industry, but there was no talk about excess inventory. It was all a comparison of this t-shirt versus this t-shirt. And it wasn't factored in that other t-shirts had been made so that that one could exist, so that you could choose on a shelf which one you wanted, right? There's so many variables that come into play for what we want. And again, the way that the industry is set up is that we have to guess what people are going to want at the end of the day, what size, what shape, what color, what style, what location. There are just too many things to get right. And when I go shopping, there's always something that's just slightly off about it. And I feel like I have to make some concession. So to answer your question about what I think one of the biggest problems is, or one of the biggest reasons why there's so much waste, is going back to the way that we manufacture, that we use cut and sew, again, that it's such a manual process and that it requires human labor. If we were to continue to make it in the United States, I imagine that our clothing consumption would go way down because it would be very expensive to actually purchase this clothing. But instead, we've gotten used to, since globalization in the early 90s, used to these price points. And from what we've seen, people are not willing to increase how much they pay for clothing, and I think that's fine. I think we need to find other solutions to getting there. And one of the other biggest reasons, I mean, there's the excess that happens kind of at the beginning, but then there's obviously what we've been talking about with an entire garbage truck dumped every second, 92 million tons of garbage per year from post-consumer in our industry. There's just too much out there. And so, again, what Unspun is trying to do is to be very intentional and change the production process so that we can make things only when they're needed, and that at the end of life, the products that come from our production process can kind of go backwards and be disassembled back into their original yarn state.
Thank you so much. And intentional is extremely important. And I also just want to thank the audience. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in. We will get to them shortly. I just have a few more that I want to pick everyone's brains and get them to share more about these innovations that we're seeing today. But please do keep sending your questions in, and we will get to them shortly. Now, Constanza, as we know, many clothes that are donated will eventually end up with textile collectors that sort them and then hopefully sends them to fiber recyclers. But can you please explain to us why precise sorting is important to the collectors and the recyclers?
Yeah. So precise sorting is important. I would say precise and efficient sorting is really what's important. The precision is mostly necessary on the recycler's front. So like as I was mentioning earlier, you need quality feedstock to be able to make quality recycled material on the other end, especially when we're talking about mechanical recycling. And so if you do not have an accurate and precise method of sorting, then whoever's recycling on the other end will simply not buy that material, which becomes an impossibility on the sorters or the collectors end, and eventually becomes too difficult and they decide not to even try and eventually ends up incinerated or in a landfill. The efficient part becomes really relevant because all of these materials, as you might expect, it's not that they're selling for, hundreds of dollars. Every single item, is a fraction of a dollar that they can make. And so when you think about sorting, and especially when you think about sorting, for example, in the developed world, the studies that we did is if you hand sort today, you're not even able to pay 70% of minimum wage in the US with the revenues that you would get by selling that as feedstock to fiber recycling with hand sorting, which, like I said, means that you're not going to be able to sort about 30% of the volume because it doesn't have the tags. And you're going to run into some issues with quality that will also push your price even further down. If you're able to get this to be an efficient, method, we're able to sort precisely, but also sort it, at a much faster and efficient or low cost manner. This just boosts the entire industry, right? It creates incentives on the collector side to actually sort for fiber to fiber recycling, because now it can actually be a viable business for them to do so instead of just nice to have from an impact perspective. And so both of those aspects are truly, truly relevant when it comes to sorting for textile collectors.
Thank you for telling us about that, because I think so many of us don't realize the depths of these processes and actually the importance of all of this, because when we look to talk, whether it's responsible, sustainable, conscious, however we want to refer to this, it's an extremely complex task at hand. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. Pete, now Circ's process can reduce the need for new polyester, which is highly polluting during the production phase, but also keeps oops, sorry, I might have a bit of an echo there, apologies. And also keep clothes with polyester from going to landfill or incineration. But how do you answer the question that if you're trying to recover polyester in a garment that was made from recycled bottles, which we do see from a lot of brands now, it may withstand the process, but won't be recoverable again. So in other words, it can only be recycled once, if that. Talk us through, what does your recovery process change and how does it affect that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question because bottles have become a bit of a hot topic in the industry. As you mentioned, a lot of brands are talking about their sustainability initiatives or that they're making things from recycled material, but it's not truly recycled, like Shelley said in the beginning. It's coming from another industry. It's coming from bottles. And Patagonia first did that in 1993. And that was great because it kept bottles out of the landfill and into a product that would last for a long time. But as it's spread to mainstream fashion, you're seeing products that don't have a very long use rate and end up basically you're just delaying the landfill by maybe 6 months to 2 years. And so that's not very good. With traditional mechanical recycling of bottles or polyester, what you're doing is melt extrusion, meaning that you're just remelting and re-extruding that plastic. And when you do that with plastics, you're lowering its strength qualities, its molecular weight, and other stuff. And so generally, you only have a few times that you can mechanically recycle a polymer like polyester. And in the case of clothing, most of the time those bottles go to textiles. And because there's no solution scale, they will go from textiles to incineration or landfill. But that's where we come in. And our solution, to answer your question, doesn't care where the polyester came from. Was it a polyester fiber or was it previously a bottle? It's the same PET molecule. And on that molecular level, we're reversing that reaction, breaking it down to its building blocks, and then redoing that reaction and making virgin-like PET again. So our solution can recycle, break down over and over the polyester, whether it's coming from bottle or coming from clothing.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's a lot. And as the consumers, it's extremely confusing, right? You don't know where to go, what you follow, you try. But greenwashing's a different a panel for another time on what we need to look at with the brands. Now, one question I actually have for you as a group, and so please, I can either call on you or step up with who would like to speak to this. Now, unlike other large industries like the automotive industry or even agriculture, the fashion industry is almost currently be entirely unregulated. Each of you has talked about, in one way or another, government regulations and what that could look to. Now, what regulations would you like to see implemented, and in what way would they actually be beneficial for you in your work? I see Beth smirking. I don't know if that means she wants to have a shot at this.
Sure.
But yeah, okay, excellent.
We all have a lot of opinions here, but I think the biggest ones that we're really watching are the zero waste ban in France and all extended producer responsibility, EPR, that's happening overseas. Would love to see that here in the US. I think it's terrifying for businesses, and they're going to be lobbying against it. There might be a few who might promote it, but it's really like, I think all of the solutions here will come into play heavily with EPR and zero waste, and making sure that companies and brands are responsible for what they put into the world, that they've made it, they've benefited from it. And at this point, basically as soon as they sell it, it's not, quote unquote, not their problem anymore. And I think we really need to change that mentality so that they are thinking more responsibly and that it is their problem. And we can all work together to make sure that things end up in the right places.
Great, thank you. Constanza, anything to add?
I just completely agree. I think EPR laws are, something that we're definitely looking into. I think what recently happened last month in California with the 707 is super interesting. Actually hasn't passed yet, but actually seeing movement in terms of an extended producer responsibility law actually being actively discussed in the US is actually encouraging. So I think that's something that, as Beth was saying, all of us here will benefit from, but that it also is absolutely necessary. We've seen it in the plastics industry, and so I think it's just par for the course now for the fashion industry.
Great. Pete?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I also think it's about time we have a carbon tax, just generally for everything, and I think everybody here will agree with that. But I wanted to give a little more context to the industry, and the apparel industry, it's not very concentrated. Some of the biggest brand names we can think of are going to be less than 1% of total production. And so when you have that kind of situation, and you're also in a business that is about psychology, trends, forecasting, that kind of stuff, brands are afraid of becoming yesterday's brand. And I don't want to pick on any brands and give examples, but we all know brands that were super popular 10, 15 years ago that aren't anymore. And so I think there's something systematically built in here where there's an aversion to risk. And that makes this very right. The lack of concentration of players and this aversion to risk to create a level playing field. And that's where sensible regulation can come in and be really effective for all of us and for the industry and for, most importantly, the planet.
Brilliant. Thank you. Natasha, anything to wrap up there to this before I head to audience questions? Oh, you're on mute.
We are very excited about everything that everyone just mentioned here, because of course it's going to further what they do, which is all interconnected. The legislation that's most impactful for us is the digital product passport. So that is where every brand that sells a product within the EU will be required to have an item ID. That means that item will be required to have all the information about its transparency and traceability, have a digital ID for resale, enable that product management, data management through Recycle. And so obviously that's crucial for us because it's basically mandating Eon within, or other solution providers within products. And that's going to help brands build the instant business case for why they need this. And that's exciting.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Now I'm just going to jump over to the audience questions here. First in, we have from Catherine, and this is definitely open to the full group. What's your take on fast fashion in the next few years, and how can we show support of sustainable fashion beyond shopping? Thank you for that question, Catherine. I think that comes up a lot. And for us that are in this space day in, day out, especially in the weeds, as I said earlier, we forget that actually a lot of citizens need tools and to understand what is out there so that they can support this movement too. So would anybody like to start with answering this question for Catherine? Beth?
Sure, I'll jump in. It's been interesting to, I'm not so old, but over the centuries of how seasons have changed. So back when before department stores, before like the 1920s and 30s, things took years to change and trend. And then when department stores came out, that's sort of when we saw like the two seasons, like the spring, summer, fall, winter. And we had people were just all flocking to one place to see what the new buzz was, what was cool. And that's when that was established. And then, of course, we all know about globalization, and when I guess this question about fast fashion came out, when 52 seasons a year is kind of what's generally accepted, but way too many new trends all the time. And I think I think that a lot of other super smart people studying like what are the new trends and how frequently do they change over. And social media and influencers have really accelerated this to the point where some things are not even cool for more than a week, and then people have moved on. And it's just really hard to fight that momentum. I love the idea of slow fashion and being really thoughtful. And I think those who can handle it, go for it. But I still think it's just like in human psychology to always want what's next. I think it's part of kind of like survival in our psyche. And it's maybe not healthy, but it just is kind of like how we're wired. So I would love for us to, as an industry, think about, if it's going to be like this, yes, let's regulate it, but is there a way we can also support it, where these circular systems can actually enable fast fashion to in a way be okay? It's kind of a big thing to ask for, but I think that's something that we should consider as a solution.
Great, thank you. Anybody like to add anything about how we can show support of sustainable fashion beyond shopping? Constanza?
Yeah, I think a couple of interesting companies have actually popped up that have kind of incorporated, circularity into their systems that make it, not just shopping, but like how do you manage, your own materials or your own clothing at end of life. So you have, companies, like Patagonia that have wornwear where you can actually send back your gear and actually sell it back for resale, all of these resale solutions. And then you have solutions like 4 Days, for example, where you can actually send back your dirty socks and they'll recycle them. And so I think not just thinking of clothing from a purchasing perspective, but what are you going to do with that when you're done wearing it, when you're done experiencing it? There are solutions that have been popping up in that space that are really interesting, and that, make you also a little bit more conscious of what you're purchasing. And so like if you start knowing and learning and educating yourself on what can be recycled or what's better for the environment, you'll just instinctually start to kind of gear your purchasing towards that, but also your actions at end of life as well. And so I think both education and looking for those solutions of not just buying from brands, that have no solution at end of life, but thinking of what am I going to do with this when I'm done experiencing it is really relevant.
Great, thank you very much. Now there's quite a few other questions here, so I'm just going to move over. Now, Peter, here's one specifically for you. Is there an advantage to having your factory near a textile collector or near a textile manufacturer rather than having clothes or materials sent to you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not unlike many other industries. You have a pulp mill close to the forest, right? And it's sort of the same thing here. But when you double click on that and you actually start to look at life cycle assessments and things like that, you recognize that the logistics piece doesn't have as big an impact as you think, mainly because you can get a shipping container at near max weight based on the bulk density of clothing if it's baled and packed in there. And so that's a somewhat efficient way from a greenhouse gas point of view of moving things around. But yeah, certainly we want to be as close as we can to the source and to the next step in the supply chain to reduce as much transportation distance as possible.
Great, thank you. Now I'm just going to come back to actually a question I have, and I'll dip in and out of the audience questions in a moment. Now, through this conversation, each of you has shared with us some very particular goals, whether that goal is related to reducing waste or pollution or growth. I'd love to hear, starting with you, Constanza, what is the goal from here that you are aiming for?
Yeah, I mean, our goal from the start was to try to eliminate textiles going into landfills as much as possible. Obviously, eliminating all waste is virtually impossible, but actively reducing it as much as we possibly can. Recycling and recycling technologies have been scaling. They're set to increase by ridiculous numbers in terms of production capacity when companies like Peters actually start scaling significantly. And so and this is actually something that's feasible to do if you have the right supply chain and the right people working together. And so one of our main goals is actually making sure that the core infrastructure, the core collection infrastructure is ready for this moment, and that we actually make sure that clothing that can be recycled does not end up in landfills.
Thank you. Pete? You're on mute.
I was so hoping that wouldn't happen, but of course it did. We have an internal mantra at CERC called 10-10-100, and that's our 2030 goal for recycling 10-10-100, or recycling 10 billion garments by then, which represents 10% of annual production, which would save 100 million trees. And so that's our rallying call, and that's what gets our team out of bed every day.
Thank you. Beth?
Our North Star is to reduce global carbon emissions by 1%, which is, taking something that's messy and really, really simplifying it. But basically, we have steps of the process where we want to eliminate inventory waste. We want to eliminate cost waste, and then get to a point of circularity where we can go backwards with our garments. And so those slowly get us to that point. It's been a while since I've looked at the numbers, especially since COVID, but generally accepted that fashion is around 4%. 3, I would say, a little less. But in any case, we're trying to address about half. That makes it a quarter, but really just about half of what the industry is going after is how we kind of got to 1% there.
Okay, thank you. Natasha?
Yeah, for us, our goal is to change the business model of the fashion industry. I think we have a way of always kind of blaming the brands as an industry, like everything is all their fault. In the systems, like everybody operates in kind of an interconnected way. And I think the rules of the game for the brands right now are basically make it impossible to be sustainable. And how do we actually change the revenue and incentives and change those models? I think will then ultimately catalyze a new way of doing business. So we really focus on how to change that business model and enable brands to, and how we quantify that is the profitability per product. How can we make it more profitable for brands to make a single product that gets monetized through its life cycle? And that could involve actually connecting that technologies to, partners like CERC and Sortile, and ensuring that those products and materials can get monetized in new ways. And then how that comes back to the brands in terms of revenue and value, such that they can afford to sustain these sustainable business models.
Great, thank you. These are all very ambitious goals, and I'm extremely excited to be able to follow along with all of these innovations. Now, I have my last group question here, and then I'm going to go back to the audience questions. And again, open floor for each of you. But the prediction is that fashion brands that continue to produce as we currently see with the take, make, waste business model and don't adapt to this more sustainable circular model are actually going to end up being the future losers in the industry and not competitive nor desirable. Do you sense that the brands are actually embracing this fact? And do you think that they will survive? Natasha?
Do I think the brands will survive which? Sorry, Carrie.
Yeah, so I was just saying, if the brands continue on with this take, make, waste business model that we see today that everyone on this call is trying to innovate against, do you think the brands currently have an understanding of this, of their future? And do you think they will survive?
Well, no, because our data showing is that brands who invest in this kind of circular system and business model are more profitable. So that will actually change that narrative. So if we look at like what just happens with resale in itself, like right now I buy from Net-a-Porter and then I go resell on the RealReal. Well, what happens when every product that I buy from Net-a-Porter, I just scan and instantly resell through them and then buy through them, right? I move from a transactional relationship with a brand into a transformational service-based relationship. Now that means those brands will maintain the customer, they'll maintain the products, and they'll maintain the data, and they'll be able to better service those customers. So if you keep this sort of transactional relationship with the customer where it ends at point of sale, we just believe that you will not be part of, the competitive future. So
I love this, looking at going from transactional to transformational. That is a brilliant line. Beth?
I would add to that. I would completely agree. And I think that in addition to that, brands are really nervous about their supply chains right now, understandably, and have actually run into a lot of issues. They're really lacking security, where they think that they're going to make something and it doesn't show up, or they think that maybe they need to make a lot of something and then actually no one's there to buy it. So there's just a lot of uncertainty around supply chains right now. And so with the take, make, waste model in producing before really they need to, it doesn't make sense for a lot of brands. And they're basically putting in money into something that's not secure. If they can sell a product and then make it, they've already taken that money, and then they can produce the product they want for it. They know what all their margins are. It just makes for a much smarter business model for them to like have everything ahead of time versus like this guessing game where producing something and it's going to waste. So I think another big thing to add is that these brands want to do the right thing. It's just that it's so far been cheaper to produce things overseas in mass with really long lead times. And so if there's a way to kind of flip that, that's something we're working on.
Great, thank you. Pete?
Yeah, I think brands are starting to respond to what their market research is showing, where you need to have better sustainability.
I think we might have lost Pete's connection for a second. So Constanza, I'm just going to move over to you.
Sure. I guess just piggybacking a little bit on what Beth was saying, I think bringing supply chains to a more local level, which intrinsically just happens with when you talk about sustainability and circularity, it reduces certain risk factors in those supply chains. And then add that to the fact that climate change has actually affected a lot of pricing in terms of virgin materials. What we've seen in the rise of the price of virgin cotton and other materials in recent years means that recycled fibers will start to get more competitive. So if you add both of those factors together, and the reduction in logistic costs and risk, that you'll have supply chain breaks because of your having a more localized approach, then that makes it also from a business standpoint something that becomes really interesting for brands. Add that to that, that you might have policy coming in, that will affect all of this, one more incentive for brands to actually embrace this in the future.
Great, thank you. Pete, welcome back. I know you were saying something very important, but we lost you for a moment. So would you like to just finish what you were saying?
Actually was making the point I wanted to make in terms of seeing on the horizon potential supply constraints here and pressure on pricing. And I think that will move the brands a lot, as well as their own market research showing what customers want. I will say, though, that absent good policy, I don't think they're moving fast enough, and they need to invest more. And I think everyone here would agree with that. And I think they will. I've definitely felt a change just in the last 18 to 24 months. I think the industry is starting to take things much more seriously and starting to deploy more and more resources to look at circularity. So I'm very encouraged and very bullish on the future.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Now, I'm just going to take one last question from the audience here. And this is something I'm very intrigued about. So I'm interested to see what the answers might be here. But Tom asks, what is the role AI can play in helping solve the issues with fast fashion and aid in sustainability? I feel like I'm just going to jump to you, Natasha, here. You are our digital voice mainly here. So, is there anything you can share to this question?
Yeah, in terms of what the technology can do to accelerate?
Yeah, like AI, we're seeing a lot of this now, right? We're starting to read about it more. We're starting to hear about all these different services that are out there. But is there a role for AI in helping solve the issues with fast fashion?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I just think, again, back to the thesis of a good system operates with connectivity and communication. Like anytime you can use technology to improve that, I think we will see incredible value. I think we've approached sustainability and resale without technology, and that's almost been a disservice to the acceleration of successfully, profitably scaling those models. If you look at the public financials of a ThreadUp or the RealReal, right, it's really challenging to see profitability in those businesses, because imagine trying to operate H&M without a barcode or an RFID tag. You have millions of products that you're manually picking up, that you're retyping and trying to figure out what SKU, what catalog, what price. You're rephotographing all of them. That's a $10 Walmart t-shirt. You're also then shipping it back to the customer. Like, we cannot move into a sustainable fashion industry without an operational infrastructure that supports the profitability and efficiencies of commerce. And I think AI and digital ID and data and connectivity are obviously big, critical tools to accelerating that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anybody, anything to add?
I'll jump in. I think, yeah, Natasha's absolutely right on connectivity being like the main thing. But then a couple of things that we're trying are AI in both like better addressing what consumers would want. So in the case of like getting your body scan and getting your perfect pattern, we're using, machine learning to make sure that we learn over time, like, will prefer, because there's kind of academic fit, and then there's preferential fit, and there's always going to be a little bit of a difference there. And then trying to decentralize production and move it around the world and not have it so centralized in specific parts of the world. We need systems there that can help us. It's maybe not quite at the AI level that we've all been talking about, but it still needs to be kind of at that connectivity and things talking to each other very in smart ways.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to you all for taking your time, for joining us here today. Constanza, Pete, Beth, Natasha, it has been incredibly insightful and just very educational conversation and learning from you all. So thank you once again for your time. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today.
Thank you, Kay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you to our guests for being here today. This has been a truly great webinar. I know I speak for Carrie too when I say that it's amazing to have 4 distinguished inventors all gathered together in the same place. It's been thrilling, and we are really grateful. I think that if there's been what they call a call to action here for consumers, I think the most important thing we do is to keep our clothes in circulation. So when they're used, make sure not to throw them out, swap them, give them away, take them back to a brand, or sell them to a charitable, or give them to a charitable organization. For brands, the call to action, Earth Day's theme this year is invest in our planet. I think that's the call. One last word on behalf of Earth Day. Earth Day is very firmly behind the Fashion Act. The Fashion Act is a bill that sits right now in the New York State Assembly and Senate. It's an extremely important bill that will establish much needed regulation to the $2.4 trillion fashion industry, which up until now has been entirely unregulated. If you live in New York State, please write to your representatives and urge them to pass the Fashion Sustainability and Social Accountability Act, which is better known by its shorter name, the Fashion Act. I want to thank Sophia Valentino at earthday.org in Washington, D.C. for her technical help today, and Megan McGastocker of the Fashion Impact Fund for her valuable assistance on today's webinar. Last but not least, Earth Day is next week, a week from tomorrow on April 22nd. It's the 53rd anniversary of Earth Day. So thank you for all of our viewers for being here today, and in advance, happy Earth Day.